Hey everybody, Jimmy Smith. This time talking about a big weekend in combat sports, which is September 14th, of course, Mexican Independence Day. And the reason I say combat sports is, yes, the UFC is at the Sphere. You also have Canelo Alvarez versus Edgar Berlanga in the same city at the same time. Right, so I'm going overseas for Bellator September 14th. We're doing a show from the UK. The good news there is the time difference means you can watch that before everything else gets started in the evening. But of course, the big competition is between the UFC and Canelo Alvarez. Boxing, essentially. It's interesting to me because one of the big debates is how much crossover there is between boxing and MMA these days, and how many independent combat sports fans can be drawn into either pay-per-view when they could buy both but end up buying one. All interesting questions that I've been discussing with my gig on ProBox TV. Every day, check me out, ProBoxTV.com. I'm doing boxing programming for them, and then I do a fight every couple weeks from up in Tampa. So when I look at this situation, one of the things is I am older for an MMA fan, right? And in my era, MMA didn't exist at all in the United States until I was in high school. So I spent most of my years, and if you watch those early UFCs, in my opinion, they weren't very good. They really didn't catch me until the fighters got better, right? The technique got better. It got more interesting later on. So I spent most of my entire childhood and then my young adult life as a boxing fan, and then got into MMA comparatively late for today because it didn't exist. So boxing is just another combat sport that I watch, period. End of sentence. I really don't, I don't separate the two that much. You have to be one or the other. Now, a modern fan, which I want to hear in the comments section from you guys, modern fan in their 20s, I grew up with Mike Tyson and Marvin Hagler and Sugar Ray Leonard and Riddick Bowe, and just an incredible era of boxing. Oscar De La Hoya and Pernell Whitaker and all those guys. I grew up in an incredible era of boxing that grabbed a lot of young people. I don't know if that exists now. I think it's starting to exist again now, but there's a big gap, maybe early 2000s to, a couple years ago, where boxing just wasn't what it used to be. And so that era may have grown up without the love of boxing. And we're seeing that a bit partly in the rise of the UFC. They had more options in combat sports than I did growing up. So the idea of, is somebody a boxing fan and an MMA fan? How much crossover is there? And how much do people have to choose? As far as television goes, in my experience, the idea that anything is competition, you have to understand why. There are only so many hours in a day. I remember there was a big Bellator. Fedor it was the Dynamite show, I believe, in San Jose, and Fedor was on it and all this stuff. It was the same weekend as Bama versus Ole Miss, which at the time Bama was number one, and Ole Miss had this huge upset in college football and blah, blah, blah. You don't have competition between football and MMA. Yes, you do, because you're fighting for essentially the same demographic, and once again, only so many hours in the day. I can't spend all day watching college football and then all night watching fighting if I have any responsibilities at all. So people only have so much time, and they only have so much money to blow $85 per pay-per-view on 2 pay-per-views. Most people aren't going to do that and can't do that. So, especially if it's not their job like it is mine. So you always have to see any other combat sport or anything pulling from your demographic as competition. So when it comes to Canelo Alvarez versus the UFC Noche card on September 14th, what are you really looking at? Sugar Sean O'Malley has been very critical of the promotion of September 14th as UFC Noche, UFC at the Sphere, rather than Sugar Sean O'Malley. Rather than focusing on him and his drawing ability, it's kind of this event. I get where the UFC is going. I don't know if Sugar Sean is crossover big. He's big in our sphere as far as MMA fans. Every MMA fan knows him and follows him, and he's got that it factor for MMA fans. I don't know if that translates into crossover success, where Ronda Rousey, John Jones, Conor McGregor, whatever, the average person on the street at least knows who that is. They might not know details, they might not spend money watching, but they know who it is. I don't know if Sugar Sean has that. I really thought with UFC Noche, with September 14th, with Mexican Independence Day, they'd really go big star-wise. I don't know if Sean's in that category. That could be why it's more the event and wow, UFC at the Sphere than the particular drawing power of the main event. Also, Alexa Grasso is their only Mexican champion. She is obviously the co-main event. They put her on the card. They put a lot of Mexican-Americans on there. They put Diego Lopez. They put Brian Ortega. They loaded it as well as they could. They don't have a standout Mexican champion in the men's division they could put as number one as the headliner. They don't have that fighter right now. And so they're doing everything they can with the championship caliber fighters that are available. They're doing everything they can to load it and make it UFC Noche. They don't have a big stellar crossover champion that is Mexican-American or Mexican right now. So they're loading what they can, but they don't have the big name to put on the poster who is. Canelo Alvarez is the biggest star in Mexican sports. That's it. He is. So the problem is when you go event versus event, Canelo fight is always going to be an event. It's always going to have that big fight feel, that big fight pop. It's going to have all of that. It's always going to have that. So I don't think you're going to say, wow, which event is bigger? Let's go with UFC. It's possible. But the thing is that boxing has now, in the last couple of years, with Turki Al-Sheikh, if you guys know who that is, who's putting on big cards, he just has first big one in LA, but big cards in Saudi Arabia. It's a lot of good fights. And this one is no exception. You have Canelo Alvarez versus Edgar Berlanga. I'll get back to that fight in a second. But you also have Caleb Plant. He's fighting. You have Erislandy Lara fighting. He's a middleweight champion. Long-time fighter. Has been around forever. This idea that the whole card itself has some really good fights on it. Right? It's worth $85. You're getting more than just one fight. It used to be you got just one fight in boxing, and if it was good, great, but you didn't worry about the rest. Now they're starting to build real cards, in part because UFC is building real cards and they need to compete with them. Now, the main event, Edgar Berlanga is not the man that you want to see Canelo Alvarez fight. That would have been David Benavidez. For people who don't follow boxing, Canelo is fighting the super middleweight division, 168 pounds. David Benavidez is the number 168-pounder in the world, and Canelo has steadfastly refused to fight him. In fact, moving up to 175 is his last fight at 75, Benavidez. So fighters are actually getting out of 168 because Canelo won't fight him. So Canelo has, taken some criticism for his selection of opponents. So Edgar Berlanga is not somebody that hardcore fight fans like me are going to go, they're better guys. And the casual fans, it's not like, oh, Edgar Berlanga, I know who that guy is. Even if he shouldn't be fighting Canelo Alvarez, I know who he is. It's not that case. When Bernard Hopkins fought Oscar De La Hoya, right? Most fans know who De La Hoya is. The fact that he wasn't going to beat Bernard Hopkins isn't necessarily on their radar, but they know the name. Berlanga doesn't check off either box. He's not a darling of the hardcores, like a great fighter whose names you guys might not know, but he's also not crossover big, so you understand why he's getting the opportunity, right? He's neither one of those. It's really just Canelo. You want to see Canelo Alvarez. So I understand the criticism of, look, if you're going to out-event boxing, you're not going to out-event Canelo Alvarez. If it's just the size of the event, Canelo's always going to be big. So the nuts and bolts of a really competitive main event that's going to be awesome and has a crossover celebrity, that's important. And does Sugar Sean O'Malley cross that box? Check that box off. I do believe it's a more competitive main event. I do believe Sugar Sean's going to have a lot of trouble with Merab Dvalishvili. And I'll break down the X's and O's, obviously, before the fight. But I do think they do have the benefit of, a really competitive main event, a really competitive co-main event in, obviously, I would say a rubber match, but not one-on-one because there's a draw in there. But the third fight between Alexa Grasso and Valentina Shevchenko, whose last fight was a draw, super-duper close. And so you do have that. Our fights are more compelling in certain ways, where Canelo's great to watch, and you love Canelo, but he's not fighting the best possible opponent in that weight class. So there's that. But it's this idea that there can only be one. I disagree with that. I think a lot of Mexican fans and Mexican-American fans are going to go to the Canelo fight and fill it up and make a really good sports weekend. And I think a lot of MMA fans are going to go to the Sphere and check out UFC Noche. I don't think you'll see necessarily a big dip in one or the other live. Pay-per-view, I don't really know. It's going to be interesting to see. Once again, you can only a lot more fans have to buy a pay-per-view than are willing to go to Vegas and show up. Mexican fans travel really well. They'll go all over the country to see a great fighter, and they love Canelo. So I don't think live you're going to see a whole lot of difference. I think both places will be pretty packed. Pay-per-view is going to be interesting. And one thing I want to know from you in the comment section, of course, I know most of you are more MMA fans than boxing, but, are you going to buy both? Are you going to, like I'm going to probably have to do, I'm probably going to have to, do my gig in London Saturday, go back to the hotel, watch one pay-per-view, and then watch the other one Sunday. I got to watch, I got to basically watch 3 full fights in 2 days. I don't know how many people are going to go through that effort. So which one are you buying and which one are you checking out the highlights? I really thought the UFC would kind of really load that UFC Noche card. It's a very solid card. It doesn't have that crossover star on it unless you consider Sugar Sean O'Malley a crossover star. I want to know if you do. But it's going to be interesting. Canelo essentially versus the UFC, and who has the edge? Like, subscribe, let me know what you think.